Hello everybody, in today's video we're going to be going over a big storm which is going to be crashing into the west. We're going to have a lot of rain, especially for California, Oregon, and Washington, mainly in the lower elevations, but as you get a little bit higher up in elevation and as you get into the interior west, you'll start to get actually a little bit of snow. And due to the big trough, which is going to be crashing into the west. So we'll have a mixture of heavy snow and rain, as well as much colder temperatures, which are going to result from this system. So we're going to be going over what's going to happen on the surface, and then also what's happening in the upper air, which is allowing this to occur. So we have a lot to cover in today's video, so make sure you are staying tuned all the way until the end. So let's start off with a quick weather photo that was sent in. This was taken by T. Vela about 2 weeks ago in the Adirondacks of northern New York, and this was at Hopkins Mountain or around that area. So she sent in 3 photos here, and the Google map of where this was taken from is on the top left. So this is the New York side right here, and then the Vermont side would be right here. So that kind of gives you an idea of where this picture was generally taken from, and again, it was at Hopkins Mountain. So this was 2 weeks ago, so it's not going to be what the fall foliage looks like right now, but you can at least see that by this point we did have some of that yellow and orange starting to pop up, and it really does look stunning when you have it in the backdrop of these big mountains in the back as well. So looking at a couple more of these, this one I like a lot because you can see the base of the mountain as well. You can see where the mountain starts to kind of rise up in elevation, and you can see the different patches of coloring within the foliage. So you can see little pockets of red, and then you have in the middle maybe a little bit more green. As you get to the top, the leaves are already dead, so you can see they're a little bit more of a gray or a black color. So really cool pictures here. And then if we look at the final one as well, I think this one is the best because you have that sunset on the left hand side of the picture. So this is from the west where you have that sunset, and then of course if that's the west, that means that this is the east, which means that this would be a north facing picture. So we're looking at a north facing picture into the mountains of the Adirondacks. You have the foliage which is really being illuminated here from the sunlight, which is beaming right onto it. Really a great photo. So if you guys have any pictures that you want to send in, send it over to this email address, which is at the bottom of the screen. So even if you have a couple photos that you want to send in, if you just want me to pick maybe 2 or 3 of them that you want to have featured, then of course I can do that. And even if it's just not, it doesn't even have to be anything as spectacular as seeing, let's say, a mountain in the middle of fall. It could just be, let's say, a cloud in the sky that you thought had a cool shape, and I could dig deep into it and see what type of cloud that is, or if you want an explanation of why that cloud formed, of course I'll do that for you, and that would be featured in the beginning of the video. As we get into the winter time, if you have any frost, freeze, ice, snow that you want to send in, especially once we get a big storm, I'm going to ask you guys to send in a couple of those photos from the storm, just because I want to see, especially if I don't live in the area of that storm, I just want to kind of see out of interest what the storm was like and how it actually accumulated, whether there was any drifting or anything like that. And I'm sure that you guys will keep me updated, whether that be in the comments or by sending in those weather photos. And then even as we get into the summertime, so thinking about as we get into 2022, if we get any big hurricanes or any big rain events, like we saw just about 2 months ago, as we had a few tropical storms, if you have any flooding pictures that you want to send in, of course, feel free to do that as well. And again, that's the email address at the bottom of the screen or in the description down below. If you have any questions or comments for today's video, just leave those in the comment section. So let's start off with the current National Weather Service page. So we do have some flood watches up into northern California, and then we have some winter storm watches up for some of the Sierra Nevadas as well as for central Idaho. Those could be extended maybe up into northeastern California. That's not completely out of the question as of right now, but this is going to be a warm-oriented storm. So you're going to have warmer temperatures compared to normal as it's moving in, and then on the back end of it is where you're going to actually have those colder temperatures. So So to start, you'll actually be fairly mild, but once the front of the system moves by and once the system eventually gets into the interior, that's when you'll start to get all the cold air into the west. Now, we do have a bit of cold air into the Midwest as well. We have freeze warnings up for some parts of Iowa, Minnesota, and Wisconsin, as well as some frost advisories in Wisconsin, Iowa, and Illinois. Somebody asked yesterday why some of these areas in North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, Montana still haven't gotten any freeze warnings or frost advisories, and the reason is they may have seen, and I'm not 100% sure if this was the case, but they may have gotten their frost after the growing season has ended. So they only put these up during the farming season, and if you've already had a frost advisory or a freeze warning, then then I believe, I'm not 100% sure on that, but I believe that would be your last freeze warning that they put up, or at least they might just put up one or two, but they're not going to put up a couple more after that. So they only put out frost advisories or freeze warnings or freeze watches during the growing season, which at this point is already over in some parts of the Dakotas, Montana, Minnesota. So in those areas, the growing season has ended. Therefore, they're not going to put out any frost advisories or freeze warnings, even though the temperatures might dip below 32 degrees. So that is just something that I kind of want to explain a little bit more. High wind watches up for western Utah and some wind advisories in eastern Utah. Now, yesterday we had a tide high temperature of 96 degrees in Zapata, Texas, 8 miles southwest of Pharr, Texas, and in Falcon Lake, Texas, and all three of those areas are right along the southern border with Mexico in southern Texas. So right along the border there is where those three towns are located. The low temperature was 10 degrees at Angel Fire, New Mexico, and the highest rainfall report was in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, where they got 2.87 inches of rainfall. No snowfall reports yesterday. So let's take a look at the European model, and we're going to quickly go through what we're expecting in terms of rain and snow within these areas. So there are a couple features that you want to pay attention to. We have this initial band, which is going to crash into the west, and then we're going to have whatever is out here, which is going to start to develop and move further to the west as well. So we're going to have multiple bands, and even after these few bands move through, we're going to have extra moisture coming in from the west. So we have an active jet over the Pacific, and that's bringing in all this moisture originally to the northwest, but depending on if the winds are maybe a little bit more northwesterly, then those could of course crash into California as well. So depending on which way the winds are facing, maybe if they're a little bit more straight out of the north or maybe a little bit more northwesterly, then they move a little bit further south with the rain. If the winds are maybe coming out of the southwest, well, now that's going to be purely oriented around British Columbia, Washington, and Oregon. So these areas, I'd say Northern California on north, guaranteed to have rainfall throughout this stretch. And even basically once you get from San Francisco on north, it's pretty much a guarantee. But these areas further south in California and Nevada, you will still probably see some rainfall, but not as much as, of course, these areas in the Pacific Northwest. So this would be by Saturday morning. As we get into the afternoon hours, you can see lighter rain tapering out by this point, but here's the big storm that's going to cause most of the chaos over the west. Maybe not chaos, but trouble, where you're going to have this one crash into the west, and as it does so, it'll bring in a lot of rain and snow, depending on where your elevation is. So starting this off for Sunday morning, you can see heavy rainfall streaming into the west. We have a spiraling low, which is basically parallel with Oregon by this point. We have the southern flank of this, which is bringing in some of that moisture to northern California and southern Oregon, and then you can already see some of that snow breaking out in the highest of elevations over to the western United States. If we move this on to about Sunday night and Monday morning, you can see that we have some very heavy rainfall into the northwest, especially for northern California. The rest of the northwest dealing with mostly moderate rainfall mixed in with some snow over some of those higher mountain passes. you'll really get a good sense of how much rain this is once we look at the total rainfall at the end of the video. But so far we're dealing with really heavy rain for some of these areas in California, Oregon, and Washington, especially so for Northern California. So we're just gonna hope and pray that none of that goes over some of the burn scars, and that we don't have any mudslides, because of course those areas are prone to have that. A lot of people think that well, if you have a drought, maybe you're, let's say, 10 inches below the normal rainfall for that year, well, everything would just be fine if you just get 10 inches of rain all of a sudden. Well, that's not really true, because the ground is not going to absorb 10 inches of rain all at once. So you're going to need to have more of a steady flow of moisture, kind of like what you see up in Oregon or Washington. You're not going to be able to have all that rain in Central California, all that drought really just get alleviated with one day's worth of 5 inches of rain, or whatever the total ends up being, because most of that is going to turn into runoff, and it's not going to go into the ground. It's going to end up flooding some of these areas, and then eventually moving into the streams and creeks, and really not saturating into the ground at all, because the ground is so dry that it's going to need to kind of get a little bit of a sprinkle of water first. You can't just dump an entire bucket on an area and then expect for it to be absorbed into the ground. That's going to take a while. It's going to be a while before most of that actually gets absorbed. So hopefully it's not as heavy of rain as what we're expecting right now, because although technically, statistically, if you look at the drought numbers, they would be alleviated, really it's not it's not really helping that much, because not all of that is really being absorbed. Now that wave moves into parts of the interior west as we get to Monday afternoon. So it's lighter rain, moderate snowfall, but still it's decent, and it's even getting into areas like Southern California, which for most of the year does not get a lot of rainfall. So this is the rainy season for these areas. Winter is when they get most of their rain. One of the reasons that they had so many drought issues was because last winter we did not have a really rainy or active snow or even snowy winter in the west. So they needed to make that up, and they couldn't, because in the spring and summer you basically get close to no rain in these areas. So you're only going to really be able to get the rain or the snow in the winter times or the fall time. So this is the exact perfect time when they normally would be seeing their rainfall. So at least we know that you're going to get some rain. At least we know this isn't going to be as dry of a winter as last year was. You continue to see those streams of moisture continuing into the west, so you have a constant, steady flow of moisture into the northwest, especially. That wave is now over into the Rockies by this point. Here's a look at the total rainfall. So you're looking at about a tenth of an inch to half an inch in that green color, half an inch to an inch in the blue, an inch to 2 inches in the yellow, 2 to 5 inches in the red, and then 5 to about 7.5 in the brown color. Once you get above 7.5 to about 10 inches, that's where you're sort of in this shading right here, more of a purple, and then in kind of the magenta or pink color, that's where you're above 10 inches. So you're looking at a majority of western Washington, western Oregon, and northern California dealing with at least 2.5 inches of rainfall. You get into the central and southern valley of California, and that's where you're dealing with mostly about an inch plus, and then you get into the southeastern corner of the state, from Los Angeles on southeastward. That's where you're looking at less than a half an inch of rainfall for the most part. Interior areas will also be dealing with a good chunk of rain. Northern Nevada, eastern Oregon, eastern Washington, Idaho, western Montana, all dealing with at least half an inch of rainfall, and then maybe even some areas getting up near an inch and a half. Now, some of this will come down in the form of snowfall, especially for areas like central Idaho, maybe in parts of Utah and Wyoming as well. So this is not going to be all rainfall for these spots. In fact, here's a look at the snowfall map. You can see that that we have some decent numbers up through the Cascades and the Sierra Nevadas. You get up into northern Nevada, northern Idaho, parts of Utah, Colorado, Wyoming, western Montana, and you're dealing with maybe a few inches of snowfall. In the higher spots, you could even be dealing with 10 or more. And if you live in the Sierra Nevadas, now this is a 10-to-1 ratio, meaning that 1 inch of liquid precipitation equals 10 inches of snowfall, and we know that's not going to be exactly the case. In the Sierra Nevadas, you might be dealing with more of a 12-to-1, 13-to-1, 14-to-1 ratio, so you could be dealing with a lot more in some of these areas than just 25 inches or so, which is being displayed on this map. So you probably want to increase some of these numbers if you live along the Sierra Nevadas, or if you're going to be going up there, or if you just plan a trip up to one of those ski resorts. Same thing along the Cascades. I would keep the numbers pretty similar, maybe bump them up a little bit if you live in the interior west. Now, here's a look at why this is happening. We're going to look at the upper air map. Now, there's a couple things that are happening by Saturday. We have a little trough, which is right here. Very hard to pick out, but you can see a little bump here within the contours. We have another one, which is out here. So we have two different troughs, and then we have this constant steady jet stream, which is moving across the west. And what's happening is now that this trough is up here, this really big low pressure, this is dipping the entire jet stream a little bit further south, which means that instead of normally having your jet stream a little bit further north, meaning that the moisture is being streamed into the northwest, areas like Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia, well, now that it's a little bit further to the south, you kind of get some parts of California in on the mix as well. You also get southern Oregon a little bit more involved with the precipitation. So that's one of the effects of this trough. Now, if we look at this for Sunday, you can see that it deepens quite a bit. So this low pressure started here, dived down a little bit, and then eventually curved up a little bit more. And now it's a very, very strong low pressure system. We're looking at about, what is that, 498, I would say 499 up there. So that's really, really deep. Usually the 540 line is the average 32-degree Fahrenheit line. So if you're looking up here, this is way below that, indicating a very deep system. So we're dealing with a deep trough into the west, and again, that trough in the west creates a little bit of a dip in where the rainfall is, because this rainfall is all being streamlined wherever the jet stream is. So now look at where the center of this jet stream dip is. It's right over California, Oregon, even central and southern California to a lesser extent. So that's where that moisture is going to be funneled into. Now, if we move this on to Monday, it hits land, and of course it's going to weaken. This is sort of like a hurricane, although not as intense, but it is somewhat like a hurricane, because once it is moving on land, it's not going to have the same ability to strengthen as it will if it's still out over the Pacific in this instance. So you can see that we have your initial low pressure still up in Vancouver Bay and some areas around Vancouver and British Columbia in general, and then we have another low pressure, another little dip in the jet stream along central California, and this is what's bringing in the rain for these areas. If we move this on to Tuesday into Wednesday morning, you can see that the low pressure, which was in central California, has now moved to the east. We have this one, which is up in western British Columbia. This one has started up here, dived down a little bit, and now taken a little bit more of a northerly route. And now we're starting to see the emergence of a little bit of high pressure over the southwest, which would indicate that the general flow of precipitation is going to be a little bit further to the north, let's say in an area like Oregon or Washington, as opposed to somewhere like California like it is right now. Now, if we look at this for Wednesday, you can see that ridge really takes shape, so you might be a little bit drier for a couple days if you live in the southwest, but when you have warmer temperatures along the west coast, usually you're going to have colder temperatures a little bit further to the east, and in this case, anywhere east of the Rockies by Tuesday and Wednesday, for the most part, will be colder, or at least in a troughing pattern. So really interesting how this is setting up. And by the way, just a nice warning not to go out on the beaches for this weekend, because if you look at the wave heights, you're looking at wave heights offshore especially that are going to be above 35 to 40 feet high. And even if you go a little bit further out, maybe a few hundred feet out, you're looking at wave swells that are going to be getting up near 55 or 60 feet in height. So really not a great time to be out on a boat or out on the beach, unless really the only exception would be Southern California. Really, other than that, you want to at least stay out of the water, which I think a lot of people are by this point, because it is getting chillier. So by this point, really, there's no incentive, unless you live in a warmer area. There's really no incentive to be on the beach because, of course, the colder weather, most people are either just walking on the beach or just kind of sitting there. So really not a lot of people going in the water. But for some of those surfers who like to go, especially in the wintertime when the waves are higher, this might be not the greatest time, because these are going to be really high waves that could potentially be life-threatening. So a little bit of a PSA warning out there, because these wave heights really will be staggering in terms of how high they will be. So that is going to wrap it up for today's video. Again, we had the weather photo of the day in the beginning of the video. Whenever I get a photo sent in, I like to feature it on the channel. So if you have any photos that you've personally taken and that you want to send in, then send it over to my email address, which is elitheweatherguyyt@gmail.com. It's also in the description down below. If you have any questions or comments for this storm, or really anything weather related in the comments, just send it down below there, and I'll be responding within a few hours of you posting that. And then really anything else that you need to contact me and you don't want it to be on a public setting, such as the comment section, then just email me as well. If you have any video suggestions, for example, this one was actually a video suggestion. I was not going to make a video originally on this storm because I didn't know if there was a lot of interest in it, but it turns out that somebody did comment asking if I could make a video on this, which I believe that was last night. So today I did end up making the video on this, and it turned out to be actually a pretty fun one to make. So if you have any weather suggestions in terms of videos that I should cover, or weather events that I should cover that I haven't already, then just send those in the comments, because there's a fairly good shot, I would say probably 80 or 90% chance that I'll end up actually doing that video topic. So again, you can really reach me anyway through email or through the comments. That is going to wrap it up for today's video, and I'll see you guys tomorrow. Goodbye.